Hi folks, and welcome to the Meaningful Money Podcast. This is season 17, episode 6. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you put your finances in order. My name is Pete Matthew, and I'm going to share with you everything you need to know and everything you need to do to secure your financial future. I'm here to help you make sense of money. Here we are once again. Great to have you with me. Looking a little bit unshaven and beardy. I did intend to sort that out before hitting record here, but I didn't, so hope you don't mind too much and hope that you're all bearing up in it all. Now, in retirement, any mistakes that we make are likely to be more costly simply because, particularly with financial mistakes, obviously we might not have the time to undo them. So I want to try and help you sidestep any financial mistakes before they become an issue for you. And as always, that starts with awareness, right? So avoiding costly mistakes in retirement. That's what we're talking about today. As usual, after the main body of the show, I'll look at a review that's been left, quick announcement about Meaningful Academy, what we're going to be talking about last week. So stay tuned for all of that. But before any of it, remember this podcast continues to be brought to you with the help of my friends at 7 Investment Management. They've been helping me out on Meaningful Money here for ages, and I'm really grateful to them for that, just for their persistence and keeping going over all this time. Next spring, it'll be 10 years they'll have been helping me out here, which is just an incredible commitment. So massive thanks to them. Do check out what they're up to. They're at 7im.co.uk. That's the number 7im.co.uk. Go check them out. Okay, I think, before we start, it's important to remember that all mistakes have degrees. They're not all binary, if you see what I mean. Sometimes a mistake is a question of something being suboptimal rather than outright wrong. But obviously that can still cost you money, right? So let's see what we can do to minimize the chance of that, shall we? And a little bit like last week, rather than what you need to know followed by what you need to do, I'll be addressing the mistakes and then their preventative cure, such as they are, one at a time. Okay, so remember, notes and links, full transcript available at the show notes, which is the only link you need to remember, meaningfulmoney.tv/RP6. That's for retirement planning, episode 6. meaningfulmoney.tv/RP6. Let's crack on with our mistakes. Okay, mistake number 1, being too cautious. Quite an important one, this. It's kind of a textbook mistake, if you like, that retirees are too cautious with their investing. And I think maybe this has its roots in the history of sort of guaranteed income in retirement, whether that was in the form of a company DB pension scheme or an annuity. And if you had investments, what you would do is that you would reduce the risk in your asset allocation in the run-up towards retirement, because essentially it was a cash event. You were converting assets into an income. And what you didn't want, of course, was a market drop right before you bought your annuity, meaning that essentially you were going to have, 20% lower income for the rest of your life. These days, far more people stay invested throughout retirement. For many, since the advent of drawdown, which is probably 30 years ago now, if not more, and especially though the pensions freedoms of 2015, a large part of their retirement income security is based on the continued investment of their pension funds. And of course, that dependence on continued investment can lead to uncertainty. It's basically a massive transference of risk from employers and pension schemes onto you as an individual investor to secure your retirement income. So perhaps it's no wonder that a lot of people err on the safe side. Now, we talked about risks last week, and a key risk in retirement is inflation. It erodes the buying power of your money over time, meaning that investments have to work harder to keep up. I imagine, you're seeing by now that really personal finance is one massive balancing act, okay? We have to balance abstract understanding that markets fall sometimes with self-awareness about how we might react when they do, because we've no idea how we actually will react until we actually have to react. I've never yet met a completely dispassionate investor, right? A lot of people like to say that they are. A lot of people in the FIRE community seem to say that. I'm not convinced. I know that I'm not one, and I spend my life talking about and working in this field. So I don't really know how lay people possibly can be expected to get everything right. Now, in a lower return environment, such as we've been seeing and we're likely to see for a long time, lower interest rates, generally lower inflation, money needs to be subject to some risk in order to do its job for you. in retirement. If you have too little equity exposure to shares, what you're actually going to do is probably face a completely different risk, that you will run out of money before you run out of time, which arguably is even worse. So how can we avoid the mistake of taking too little risk? There's a few things we can do, actually. Firstly, we can educate ourselves. That's why we're here, right? So increased knowledge and familiarity with anything can help to reduce its scariness. It's the reason I always ask my dentist to talk me through what he's going to do to me. Somehow knowing it in advance makes it a bit less scary. So learn about how investments work. Learn about how they've behaved in different market conditions. If you are going to be the prime mover in your own retirement security, well, you're going to need to bone up on what you're doing. Don't just cross your fingers and hope for the best. We can bucket our money using the cash flow ladder, which I talked about last week and in a bit more detail in season 16, episode 8. Links to both of those shows in the show notes. If we know that the money we have exposed to the most risk is the money that we don't need in the near term, that will help, believe me. What bucketing does, the cash flow ladder, it helps compartmentalize our money. And it helps when we're saving for specific projects. Quite often we have buckets for that. I'm going to use that account for that particular savings project. And it works the same for drawing down over specific timescales. If we've sort of compartmentalized our money, that the higher risk is the longer term stuff and we don't need it yet, it's easier to let it run and do its thing no matter what markets are doing. We can guard our media intake. There is nothing worse than the media for making us worry about stuff unnecessarily. Over the past 3 months of the COVID-19 lockdown, I've had loads of conversations over Zoom and phone calls, obviously, with clients. Now, on many occasions, they've said to me something like, well, I know my investments are going to be down massively. You're probably going to you're ringing me to tell me that I've lost half my money. And then I tell them, actually, you're only down about 8% or something like that. They just can't believe it. So talk about framing, right? The media have actually made my job easier because they're framing my bad news, you're down about 8%, inside much worse news, which makes my news seem like the best news ever. They're like, oh, thank God, I thought it was going to be much worse than that. And I remember that exactly from 2008 and 9 as well, in the great financial crisis. Clients, without exception, saying, gosh, I thought it was going to be much worse than that. Why? Because that's what they're hearing in the media. We can guard our media intake. We can set and forget, right? When we're able to set up our retirement investments in a good way, we can have the confidence not to meddle. We know it's set up correctly. And it's really important not to meddle. Meddling rarely leads to anything good. Ultimately, being too cautious with our investments in retirement or any other time really stems from either a lack of understanding or maybe having been burned before, right? Whenever I've spoken with a client who has maybe been burned with bad investments in the past, it's always, I can't think of any exception, it's always been the case that the investments were really badly set up, right? Actually, it wasn't the investments or the markets that were at fault. It was the investor, or more usually their advisor, right? So, taking too little risk, it's our first costly mistake, potentially costly anyway. Mistake number 2, mismanaging cash flow. So we've seen that investments have to work hard to support our income needs in retirement, but a key variable as to just how hard our investments have to work is the level of withdrawals that they are required to support. Now, in my experience, retirement has a tendency to magnify bad habits that were already in place, right? A little bit like alcohol. So if I get a client who's already spending too much while they're working, but maybe they're lucky enough to have inherited or just had a big DB scheme with a fat lump sum, maybe, I can usually tell that they're going to spend it too quickly. When we were at Jackson's we did a few DB transfers for the right people in the right time. We turned away some potential clients wanting to transfer their defined benefit scheme because we could see that they were spending way too much money. And at least if they had a guaranteed income, that was all they were going to be able to spend, rather than transferring that big lump sum transfer value out into a pension that they can draw down too quickly and be left with nothing. Now, I often encourage my clients to let go a little bit in the early years of retirement, buy the camper van or the Tesla that they've been dreaming of, take the big holiday, treat the kids and the grandkids, do all those things. But when we're planning for clients, I always assume that spending will kind of find a level in a few years. And I try to help my clients then work out what the optimum level of income actually is. And so when we are planning their retirement timeline, we'll often talk about the early years of retirement being, first 3 to 5 years, followed by, hopefully, a very long period after that, where things are somewhat normal in terms of expenditure. And in normal circumstances, expenditure can be anticipated. The things that can't, in retirement in particular, are long-term care or other medical costs. Maybe having to help out a child after a relationship breakdown, something like that. But other than that, there's not too much that's likely to jump out of the woodwork and surprise you. I did have a couple divorce in their late 70s once, and that was a financial challenge, I can tell you, but that's unusual. Now, as with all aspects of our finances, expenditure must be intentional. Now, if it isn't, then the only one to blame if your money runs out too quickly is you. All right? I used to have a client who changed his car about every 18 months. And these were pricey cars, right? He had an Audi TT, Porsche Macan, Jaguar F-Type, all in the space of less than 6 years. Now, I calculated the depreciation he suffered on those 3 cars alone to be about 50 grand, if not more. You might as well just open your windows and start chucking money outside. Complete madness. No clever investment laddering strategy is ever going to compensate for that, right? So I find that those who have built wealth themselves during their working lives, they just don't have an issue with this at all. Those who have inherited money late and who were not great with organizing their finances before, or maybe they spent everything while they were working, but they were just lucky enough to be in really good defined benefit scheme with a great lump sum, those tend to be the ones who struggle with this. Part of the planning for an expensive first few years of retirement, followed by a more normal long run after that, is simply to get it out of the system, right? I think it's important to reward and mark the event of passing into retirement. Nothing wrong with that at all. But as long as it's done, what? Intentionally. Okay, mismanaging cash flow is so important. One of the primary levers under our control. How are we doing? 12 minutes in, we're doing okay. Okay, mistake number 3, taking tax-free cash. Okay, you're thinking, what? Surely that's the right thing to do. Well, too often it's the default decision to just take the tax-free cash available from accumulated pension funds. It's almost the case of, well, it's there to be taken, so I'll take it, right? Remember how it works. 1/4 of your accumulated DC pension, so defined contribution money purchase pension funds, can be taken as a tax-free cash lump sum when you choose to crystallize your pensions. Now, there are very rarely some occasions where you can take more than 25% tax-free cash, often from old pensions where the rules are slightly different. And often what happens is the tax-free cash from pensions is used to fund the big holidays or other big purchases that people often make when they first retire. And of course, that's absolutely fine. But like all things, the decision to take your tax-free cash should be made intentionally and never by default. So why might you consider not automatically taking your full tax-free cash as soon as you can? Well, firstly, if you've got an inheritance tax issue, you might want to consider not adding to that problem by shifting money from your pension, which is almost always not subject to inheritance tax, into your bank account where it is taxable, right? This isn't really the time to go into the inheritance tax rules. But if you've got an estate that is potentially liable to IHT, you probably will know it. Also, while the money is inside your pension, it is growing free of all taxes. Whereas if you pull it out, it's in your bank account, hence potentially taxable. You might reinvest it into an ISA, of course. That might take you a few years, depending on the amounts involved. Taking all your tax-free cash in one go is very sort of broad brush action, which might not actually be the best choice. Remember, whenever you move any money in pensions over the imaginary line, which advisors like me, we call it crystallization, at that point of transfer from pre to post crystallization, that's the point at which you get to make the decision whether you take tax-free cash or not. So if you just shift all your fund over the line and take all the tax-free cash available, it's job done. Once for all, you've done it, made that decision. You can never sort of change it or go back on it. Maybe instead, you could draw from your pension in a series of withdrawals over time, and part of each withdrawal is tax-free cash, part taxable. If you've got no other income, you could be taking £16,666 out of your pension per year tax-free by using your personal allowance and then your tax-free cash on top of that. That might be particularly useful if you're looking to retire before state pension age, but after the point at which you can draw from pensions. Or maybe before income from other DB schemes comes in that you might have. All I'm saying is to think it through and not just default into the thinking of, well, I'm 55, I can take my tax-free cash, so I will. I see that all the time, and it makes me quite sad because it's just not thought through. Okay, so taking tax-free cash, potentially costly mistake number 3. Mistake number 4 and final is obsessing about money. Thought long and hard about that word, but I think it's powerful enough. I think it's the right one to use. This is somewhat linked to the first, perhaps being a bit too cautious. Maybe it's a symptom. Maybe that one is a symptom of this one. I don't know. But when I say obsessing about money, I mean thinking about it too much, elevating it to a position in people's lives where they're just affording it too much mental energy and time. And often this manifests as obsessing about the news, all right, and its impact on your portfolio. Maybe constantly looking around for the highest interest rate for their savings, almost to the point of mania, right? Keeping an eye on the news, getting the best return for your money. Obviously, those are not bad things, quite the opposite. But like all things, they can be taken just that bit too far and just get to the point where it's not healthy. Always remember, money is a means to an end. It's never an end in itself, and it's there to serve your life aims, whatever they are. It should never be an aim itself. That just isn't a healthy pursuit. It's what money provides and enables that we should pursue, never the money itself. Sometimes an unhealthy obsession comes from unease, born of ignorance, right? And we've mentioned this before, and please hear me. I don't mean ignorance in a willful way, just a lack of understanding about how it all works. And a huge part of my job is working for people who pay me to obsess about their money on their behalf, right? That's entirely right. It's the reason why I'm convinced there will always be a need for financial advisors, even in this brilliant disintermediated world of fantastic DIY platforms, low-cost investing available to all. Even in this environment, advisors will still be needed. Now, most of you listening to this won't ever need to pay an advisor. There are many, obviously, who will benefit from doing so, but most won't. But there are many, many people who've never listened to a personal finance podcast who would seriously benefit from working with an advisor. Ignorance can be fixed by education and understanding. That's why this podcast exists. I wanted to help those who I couldn't help one-on-one as part of my day job. But really, those are your two options for keeping money in its rightful place. Either educate yourself so that you can organize your finances largely to look after themselves, or delegate all that to a professional, if you prefer, so that you don't have to think about it. Even if that professional just helps you set things up right, and then you take it on from there. That is way better than obsessing, constantly tweaking, and never being quite sure that things are right, so-called. If it's education that you're after, of course, you're in the right place. Be sure to sign up to be kept informed of the retirement planning phase of Meaningful Academy. That's coming. Hoping to launch that to a limited number of founders in early July. Head over to meaningfulacademy.com, click to find out more about retirement planning, and you'll be on the mailing list. If it's hands-on help that you think you need, remember there's a Work with Pete button on the Meaningful Money website. I've got a waiting list right now, but you can, we can definitely work with you before too long, no matter where in the country you are, used to working remotely. But if you prefer to work with somebody more local, there are some great advisors all around the country, and I know most of the good ones. So send me an email, and I'll hook you up with somebody near to where you are. Okay, so the title of this session is Avoiding Costly Mistakes. How exactly are those 4 mistakes costly exactly? So being too cautious might mean that you run out of money because you didn't invest intentionally enough, costing you enjoyment of your later life. In monetary terms, it might actually cost you growth on your portfolio. Mismanaging cash flow often means you've wasted money on stuff you don't need. Or again, it might mean that you run out of money in later life. Maybe sometimes it means that you feel you have to invest more aggressively than you might be comfortable with in order to catch up because you're spending too much. And the volatility of that approach might cause you to make some unwise decisions and cost you money. Taking tax-free cash without thinking might cost you inheritance tax or incur you more income tax down the line when you could perhaps have used that tax-free cash as a planning tool to make more of your income actually tax-free. And obsessing about money robs you of the enjoyment of your retirement. Again, can lead to be making bad decisions that cost you real pounds and pence. You could definitely be putting your mental energy to much better use. So you can see how all these are interlinked. And isn't it funny how so often it all comes down to being intentional in your decisions about finance? Maybe I'll get that tattooed on my forearm. Be intentional. If only Joe would let me. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, in the next few weeks, probably early July, we're going to be doing a founders launch of the third and final phase of Meaningful Academy, which is called Retirement Planning, just like this season of the podcast. There will be 2 modules available at launch, much deeper dive into how to set up and maintain a retirement portfolio on a cash flow ladder, including how to review and rebalance it in different market situations. Also, we'll be modeling retirement using the incredible Voyant Go cash flow planning app. I've got a couple of hundred people in the earlier phases of the academy. In fact, I've got a couple of hundred people in Build Wealth. They're using Voyant already, and they absolutely love it. Super powerful, yet dead easy to use. So if you want to be kept informed about the launch, again, head over to meaningfulacademy.com. Click to find out more about retirement planning. Add your name and email address to the form, and we'll keep you posted. Thank you in advance. We'll see you there. Okay, quick review this week from Matt Robbo90, who says, loving every episode. Pete has done a great job of keeping the topic of finances simple and engaging for those of us whose eyes glaze over at the thought of numbers, spreadsheets, and planning. And me, spreadsheets particularly. Being self-employed, I had no clear strategy of what I wanted to do with my money so that it would grow over time and act as my own pension. But now I do. Thanks, Pete. Well, thank you. I always think I must really bring up the Matt Robbo90. I should have that straight underneath so I can remember who it's by. So thank you, Matt Robbo90. If you want to leave a review, meaningfulmoney.tv/iTunes. Wherever you're listening to this, though, if you can leave a review, please help me. I had a review through from Podbean this week. Didn't even know that was a thing, but thank you for leaving me that review on Podbean, whoever that was. Hopefully I'll read it out before too long. Okay, next time we're going to be talking about settling in for the long haul. Most folks get to a point where, they've got everything they need and they find a kind of balance in their daily routine. That's definitely as it should be, but it presents, potentially at least, some challenges and opportunities. So we'll talk about that next week. And that is it for this session. Hope you enjoyed it. Remember, questions, comments, meaningfulmoney.tv/RP6 for retirement planning episode 6. Don't forget the Facebook group either, meaningfulmoney.tv/community. Over 4,000 people in that group now. Great place to ask questions and get them answered by some really smart and very cool people. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll talk to you next week. Cheers.